All right, my name is Amy Summers. I'm founder and president of Pitch Publicity and Vox, and I have the privilege of introducing our guest speaker today. This is Sherry Fry. She is VP Total Wellness at Nielsen IQ, and I just asked her, what does that mean? And she's going to explain. So that's a very fancy VP title of Total Wellness. And she has 20 plus years of industry expertise. Her market research, innovation, and consulting background has delivered insightful strategies to clients in fresh, CPG, and wellness sectors. And she's a trusted source on consumer health, wellness, and environmental matters. And being in the communications business for many years, 20 plus years myself, Nielsen IQ, I can tell you, is the dominator in every thing that I've ever touched, and they're a big deal here, and they're doing a lot of things in our industry that are very unique that you should definitely listen to her about. So I will be back with your questions after Sherry's done.
Amy. Hi, everyone. Okay, buckle up. I am going to cover a lot of ground today in terms of what we're seeing in terms of trends around wellness, the consumer, formulations, things to think about. Frankly, I'm going to share with you the conversations we're having with our clients. This presentation you probably saw is already available up on the website, so you can download it, you can share with your organizations. Thanks, Amy, so much for that introduction. So Total Wellness, it's really an interesting thing. We call that at NIQ or Nielsen IQ, we call it Total Wellness because what we're finding is consumers are thinking about their personal health and wellness, they're thinking about sustainability, and they're thinking about social responsibility. And in particular, what we are finding is, click, click, click. What we're finding is those are becoming more and more intermingled, and so that is why we call it Total Wellness at NIQ. I do need to make a disclaimer. I am going to talk to you about what's happening in terms of trends around claims, around a topic like this area of food as medicine, as well as supplements. Please know that, advising you not to actually make claims that are, not make such claims on package, especially from a food standpoint around mitigating or treating diseases. All right, so I mentioned total wellness. What we have found, this is Nielsen IQ research, what we have found is that there is a unique hierarchy of needs that consumers have around wellness. And we have been doing this research year over year, and at a very base level, there's this idea that consumers are focused on the immediate needs, very protective, the diabetes, the heart disease, et cetera. We all know that this really escalated during the pandemic in terms of the vulnerabilities for those consumers in particular. As you go down this pyramid, and by the way, some of you might be thinking, wow, it looks like Maslow's hierarchy flipped upside down. It does have some similarities. What we found in the area of self-care and aspirational is that consumers are really broadening how they're thinking about wellness. So it is more of this new emerging areas around digestive health, mental health, and mental health meaning everything from truly diagnosable things to, like my brain health, my brain cognition, etc. What we found really fascinating is this idea of altruism. So the idea of the social responsibility, it's not just for me and my family, but the health of the planet, health of others, the health of the environment. That last year and the last couple of years was actually at the bottom of the pyramid. We found this year in our 2023 research, it actually moved up a level, which is fascinating considering the inflationary times that we're in and some of the sacrifices that I'm going to show you that consumers have made in the last year around wellness in particular. This is a little bit depressing. So from an NIQ standpoint, some of you might be thinking, is this Nielsen IQ? I'm a little confused. We are actually a split off from the former Nielsen company. We call ourselves NIQ or Nielsen IQ. We've been around for 100 years. We measure sales trends, so what's going through the retail register, but we also have a panel list of consumers that we ask every year, who in your house, what are you struggling with in terms of ailments? Here's the reality. There's a couple things I just want to call your attention to because this conversation today in terms of formulation is really focused on how health is changing and how that has implications for our industry. So when you think about this, we all know that we are getting unhealthier and unhealthier and unhealthier in this country, right? I mentioned that the spotlight on the comorbidities, the diabetes, the obesity, the heart disease. We just started measuring depression 2 years ago, and we were a little shocked to see 22% of consumers saying that me or someone in my household is struggling with depression. We also started measuring respiratory challenges that consumers are having. When you look at this, obviously, the ailments that we are seeing in our country and the continued growth of these indicates opportunities as we are thinking about formulations in particular. One thing I will tell you, we're actually in the process, one of the big questions we are getting asked a lot is Ozempic, the weight loss drugs, are they having an impact on food? And what we have found is we actually, because we track these consumers, we've seen a doubling in the number of consumers who have obesity or overweight and are taking a drug. But what we're not finding, there's been a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of, are they decreasing their volume? Are they eating less? Anecdotally, we hear that, right? That people are like, the portion sizes are smaller. But actually what we're finding is they tend to be eating more. Actually, those households, they're eating more in terms of their volume, but they're more heavily focused on sugar, carbs, and calories. We're seeing a real strong increased interest in those households in that in particular. We're often asked, what are consumers looking for, in particular when they're looking for food and beverage? And I really like this layout because it shows you a couple things. You hear about, emerging trends. This is anything that has consumers are saying, hey, above 5% of consumers are saying, I'm looking for this when I'm choosing products. The middle is about 10%, and the top is 18% and above. So it gives you this perspective of where these claims, these emerging claims and some of these proven claims are falling. Obviously, as it relates to the ailments that I mentioned, the sugar, the carbs, the calories, those continue to be top. Anything that is highlighted, and it looks like the highlighting is a little hard to see here, that actually is telling you that that claim is growing faster than what we're seeing in terms of total store sales. So again, it really illustrates consumers are saying they're interested, and we're finding that growth from an overall standpoint. Now, when you think about the health of the country, right, and you think about what this looks like, one of the big challenges that we have is when you actually look at our food and beverage supply, you can see that this, and what you're looking at here is added sugars, fat per serving, and sodium per serving. The piece, obviously, there's much of a conversation around sugar. I'm going to dive into sugar and diabetes in a little bit more detail because we think that is one of the biggest opportunities for our industry to be looking at and thinking of. But the one I do want to call out for you is down here. 25% of our food and beverage sales is over 300 milligrams of sodium per serving. The implications of that, and by the way, it's growing. So I'm not saying, we know as consumers, we say we want to be healthier, but we also know that consumers, what we say, it doesn't always match what we're actually doing. But I think the reality of what this means in terms of the impact of food on our overall health will give some opportunities for where we can lean in as an industry. Just quickly looking at the high categories in terms of the high added sugar and then the high sodium. Again, this information is shareable for you overall. So you're hearing more and more about this idea of food as medicine or food is medicine. And so when we work with our clients, a couple things that we do. If they're in the food space, we often say, let's look at what's happening in supplements. Supplements are a really great example of where you're seeing some of the early claims, the early opportunities. So a couple things that we have seen. Some of the top claims, you can clearly see digestive health, both in the food side as well as in the supplement side, really growing. And everything around microbiome, probiotics, prebiotics, kombucha, even actual products that are tied to this, we see a strong level of growth. We also track what consumers are searching for when they go to a retailer website. And we love this because it's kind of like that signal identification. They're telling us even before we're actually maybe formulating for it or putting on pack. We've seen a jump in consumers that are typing in and they're going to a retailer website, gut health. So we know that this is an important area. Am I okay? When I turn around and look, can you still hear me? Okay, good. So I wanted to definitely call out that digestive element because of the fact we're seeing it in both of these places. The other piece to call out for you, and you look at where's kind of the emerging trends. So supplements, some of the fastest growing areas here, hydration, electrolytes, mood. So kind of thinking again, what are the consumers looking for? What we did find really fascinating, so we're always watching the interplay between supplementation and food. During the pandemic, if you remember, we all popped everything, right? We were taking vitamin D, we were taking zinc, we were really taking a lot of supplements around immunity. We've actually seen immunity supplements go down, but what we've seen is this growth of immunity in food as medicine, indicating that consumers kind of got on board with the idea of immunity, but have evolved their thinking to a more holistic view, kind of a realizing like that's not something you can really just have an immediate, take a supplement for. When you think about trends, and we're always kind of diving deep into the trends, how a consumer feels about their health, whether they're proactive and kind of daily making positive actions on their decisions versus when they're reactive, actually also has implications in terms of, do they tend to lean into food to solve, or do they actually lean into supplements? And in general, you can see that, and one of the groups that we care, that we're really watching the most, is obviously the proactive people in green. There's about half of consumers. They really care. The passive ones, there's about a quarter of them. Honestly, a lot of times what we see for these consumers is they're really just struggling to put food on the table. They're really struggling from their health, just from an equity standpoint. The ones we find most interesting, and we work with many of our clients on, are these reactive consumers. Generally, they're saying, I don't really care about health and wellness until they get triggered, and it's usually by an ailment, and that's where we see some really fascinating changes. We also, by the way, see some fascinating changes, as you would expect, when consumers go through life cycles. So I just recently did some work on menopause and how we see a real shift in what consumers are buying when they start to go through perimenopause and menopause. Same thing when they're starting to deal with fertility and infertility sorts of issues. So kind of the attitudes as well as the life stage is pretty critical. I did want to talk about diabetes. We've done a lot of work in this area in particular. We think this is a huge topic. It has a lot of implications for food. It has implications for supplementation. It has implications for healthcare overall. So we know that we continue to see this grow. We also know that there is a good percentage of consumers that are undiagnosed with diabetes. From a claims standpoint, we continue to see products that are making claims around diabetic health, sodium, carbs, sugar consciousness, like glycemic index, continuing to grow. So we know consumer interest is there. We know there's an area of opportunity. As I mentioned, even those consumers that are on Ozempic and are overweight, they're actually leaning into carbs and sugar conscious. So we know that this is kind of that area. And in particular, right, from a food standpoint, with the FDA looking at the healthy labeling and there will be an increased interest in kind of topic, especially around added sugars. That will continue to be kind of front and center for consumers. I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this. We've done a lot of work on the diabetic journey in particular, and I think one thing to call your attention to is why this is important is, A, there's so many consumers that are undiagnosed with diabetes, but the second element is we all know someone who has diabetes, and it's likely that it's a family member. And so what actually is happening is we find that there are many consumers who are acting like diabetics, who are very conscious about their sugar and their carbs, not because they're even diabetic today, but because they're worried about what will happen. We also track these consumers. We're married up to their medical records, and we can see when they're approaching a high A1C. They don't even know this, but they start going to the convenience store and they're buying sodas and they're buying waters because they're actually thirsty. So we can even see these behaviors before they're even diagnosed. Then we see what happens when they are diagnosed. One of the big elements that we find, and this is a huge opportunity for the industry, there's a huge level of grief from consumers, mental anguish when they are diagnosed, because it is like, my life as I knew it was over, right? Once you're diabetic, you're not diabetic, right? So that is a huge challenge in terms of what am I going to eat? How do I eat? What the heck do I eat? When you look at conversations, it's confusing. Can I eat carbs? Do I not eat carbs? What's the alcohol situation? As an industry and the research that we have done, while we are seeing more and more claims that are help clarifying this for consumers, the reality is when we go on retailer websites, we've analyzed retailer websites and we've said, diabetic health. What comes up is Glucerna and test strips, right? There's not products that are coming back to actually aid consumers. We've got a huge, huge opportunity as an industry to support these consumers better. And in particular, some of the areas that they're focused on, it's not just diabetes. Their biggest concern is the other complications, right? The other comorbidities that they might have. And so they're very, very concerned about preventing those complications. Now, we actually took a look, and the reason I just wanted to share this with you as you're thinking about formulations, we took a look at the consumers after they had the diagnosis. You could tell the doctor had said, like, you got to make some major changes. When they made changes, we actually did see they were able within 90 days to decrease their A1C numbers. One of them was in these high consumption categories. One was actually even if they were just purchasing sugar conscious products. So as you look at this, here's kind of what happens from a consumer standpoint when they have diabetes. They shift right away. They shift to drinking water, diet soda. They're super confused about alcohol consumption. There's certain brands that they just kind of lean into that are known for carbs in particular. They struggle with ice cream. This is actually one of those areas where they struggle when we watch them, and pasta. And we typically see about 9 months after a diabetic is diagnosed, they make changes. About 9 months in is where we see them actually regress and kind of start eating, unhealthily again. It's a lot. That's about that time period where it just feels like it's a lot. And in particular, they struggle the most with cakes and donuts. I share this with you just because this is an example of how we think there's an opportunity to think differently about the consumer and their journey. You could do this exact same thing for obesity. You could do this for heart disease, but this idea of where are they struggling? Where are the opportunities within formulations around categories where they especially need support and need help? There's a couple things we found in terms of if there were a couple people with diabetes in the household, they actually tended to do better. If there were children in the household, they actually tended to do better as well. I think that was a little bit of that wake-up call and the morbidity, kind of like, how do I make sure I'm around for a long time? We track a variety of claims, but as it relates to diabetes, we just wanted to talk a little bit about sugar because sugar is such a hot topic. And so you can see that we have seen, really phenomenal growth in things like erythritol, monk fruit, and just in general, this idea of like free from artificial sweeteners, more and more. So just a little bit of the trends that we're seeing in that space. But again, we're tracking across all of these areas. Allulose, I know many of you are looking at allulose, formulating with allulose. We wanted to just share a little bit with you in terms of these are the top super categories where we're seeing allulose, but then on the right you can see some of the fastest growing categories. And again, bringing this to you because I think it really nicely aligns with where we are seeing this as a solution, as an ingredient solution, serving the needs of many of these categories where consumers were struggling with getting, letting them go or continuing to eat them. So again, just a little bit of a look at kind of a very interesting, we think, ingredient from the diabetic standpoint. So, there's kind of a lot of noise in the industry right now about the heavily processing, right? And number of ingredients. And a question from a consumer standpoint in terms of, do consumers think if there's too many ingredients, what does that mean to them? What are the implications? One of the things that we have seen, so on the top we were just looking at meat alternatives, and you can see that the number of ingredients in meat alternatives has stayed about steady. But when you look at the number of ingredients, kind of from a food and beverage standpoint, we're actually seeing an increase in the number of ingredients. One of the interesting things we think that is from a consumer standpoint, we're about to release some research that we did with the FMI, the Food Institute, and we found that there has been an increase in consumers' interest in food transparency, of course, but wanting to know more about ingredients. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing more and more manufacturers do is be more clear on labels in terms of what is this ingredient for, right? So the ingredient, the kind of common name, and then what it is used for, much more educational from a kind of to a consumer standpoint. We all know consumers are becoming more and more savvy. They're paying attention to the claims. And in particular, we look at what we call clean label. This would be no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, etc. We tend to find that those are continuing to grow across the store, even just greater than what we're seeing in terms of total store sales. And this is a few examples. So what you can see here is, we kind of just wanted to give you a perspective of the share. So food and beverage is the biggest space within the store where we are seeing what we call a clean label as an overall standpoint. And then you can see even in pet care though, right? All of these areas are growing. The smallest right now is household care in terms of that, and that kind of makes sense. They're always tending to be a little bit behind and a little bit from a lagging standpoint. The top clean label claims, though, that we wanted to just share with you today, from a food and beverage standpoint on the top, it is from, the free from artificial flavors, the non-GMO, natural. You can see much of that. On the bottom, the supplements, you can see, again, it's the free from artificial flavors and colors and non-GMO. Very similar in terms of the top clean label trends in supplements and in food. Obviously, we're all watching what's this Skittles law in California, right? And the kind of the red dyes and that, the implications that will have on the food industry. Obviously, I mean, we've looked at things like Prop 65, where manufacturers have had to have different formulations for products that are sold in California versus not. There are obviously implications of what's going to happen here with this, which, by the way, poor Skittles is so maligned because they're not even actually part of their products aren't even really part of it. But I think the call out here is when you see something like that in terms of major legislation, and when it has a catchy name like that, it can tend to drive consumers paying more attention to specific types of ingredients. So we are hypothesizing, and we're tracking this now, but we actually anticipate this will probably continue to grow just because of the news and the media around one specific state on the forefront of that. I'm a total data nerd. I love bubble charts. I love to show a lot of data at one time. We wanted to also share with you as you're thinking about products and you're thinking about formulations. As I started the conversation, I mentioned that we're looking at this idea, and consumers are looking at this idea of their health, the health of the planet, and the health of others. And so to orient this to you, we think it's a kind of a great way to think about where there's opportunities in the overall store and what the implications might be for your categories. So across the bottom, this is the number of categories that are in the store. So its category would be strawberries, category would be cereal, right? So like the number of categories, there's about 2,100 in the store. The vertical axis is the growth versus 3 years ago, and then the size of the bubble is the size of the sales. I'm a nerd, but I love this because I think this is a great way where you can see a lot of data at one time. So things that we are getting a lot of attention, you're hearing a lot about, upcycled, obviously, right? From a formulation standpoint, we really strong growth. Because of the size of that bubble, you can see that it's still small in terms of the overall sales, and it's not in a lot of categories. Regenerative agriculture. This is another one, much conversation around regenerative agriculture in this space. You are seeing, even you probably saw in the last couple weeks, Walmart and General Mills announced that they are partnering together to bring 600,000 acres of wheat land to regenerative agriculture in the next, by 2030, I believe. Why you will hear regenerative agriculture, are you all familiar? You feel like you're hearing it a lot? Yeah. Why you'll hear more of it is obviously because of the impact that it has on Scope 3 greenhouse gas emission reporting, right? Where most of the major CPGs handle Scope 1 and Scope 2. That's kind of their in-house. Scope 3 handles is what happens further upstream, usually at the farm. So you'll see more and more trends around regenerative agriculture. We actually anticipate that to continue to move pretty quickly over to the right. But then also some of these other elements that I wanted to call your attention to. More and more we are seeing brands talking about water. We think water is going to be the next conversation. Water in terms of water formulations, water in terms of water usage in plants, just water overall, as well as carbon. There's a variety of ways that consumers are being introduced to carbon. Now, I will tell you, these are just some of the overall trends. Couple of things that we're also looking at is there are people that really are passionate about wellness, passionate about the environment. They tend to buy more, be more knowledgeable, really care about some of these claims. We've also done a lot of research where we are finding that there are people that are skeptical about sustainability, and we have politicized it, honestly, in this country. We've got about 34% of people who are some of them are climate deniers, some of them are overwhelmed, but just in general, they're a little bit like, this is all too woke, right? That's got some implications as well. And so we're watching, though, even those consumers, there are things that they care about. One of them in particular is fair wages. That one resonates very high for those consumers. So understanding what the trends are, the way many clients use this chart is they actually look at their categories then, and they see like what claims are showing up in their particular category. And for many clients, they actually use this where they're looking at what are the fastest growing claims in adjacent categories, categories that their consumers are purchasing as well. So it gives you, again, just a little bit of the lay of the land of some opportunity areas. The final piece, that's a lot, right? That bubble chart. So when you think about that bubble chart, here's the really great news. Consumers are being exposed to many more claims in the store. There's a lot of opportunities for them to kind of show who they are by what they purchase. And at the same time, they're getting more and more confused. We track hundreds of claims around sustainability. Every month we're adding more, and sometimes even we're like, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, so the claims, the confusion, the challenges. So one of the things that we have started to do is we've started to kind of aggregate up this idea, as I mentioned, of total wellness, which is this better for me and my family? Is it better for the environment? And is it better for society? So we've been watching this kind of better for aspect to give us a perspective of where's the categories, where are the brands, kind of where are different manufacturers going. We're doing this today only in the food and beverage space with the intention to move it into vitamins and supplements and other areas of the store. But you can just see, again, a little bit of the lay of the land. But I think even more interesting is that growth that we're seeing in the better for. Which, as I close this out, I just wanted to call out one thing. So I speak on wellness. I actually was laughing, Amy, by the way. I was like 20 years. When I say 20 years plus, I'm like, I probably need to tell the truth that it's 30 years. 30 years plus in the industry. But one of the things that we've seen in the last year with inflation, so I started the conversation and I told you that we saw consumers' preference around altruism, health of others, health of the planet, increase in importance. Well, the reality is we really did see, and this is not just for better for, we saw it with organic. The last year's been really tough for consumers, and they traded out. You can actually see about March of last year to about July of this year, they were trading out of wellness. Wellness was actually sacrificed for many consumers. So as you think about this, one of the areas that we're focusing at NIQ and we're continuing to look as we think about formulations with our clients is, I think one of the saddest things of the pandemic and since the pandemic was we have continued to see this polarization of consumers, right? We as an industry, we tend to always formulate for the 7% of consumers who are thriving on the one end of the spectrum. But when we really look at the data, there are more people than ever that are vulnerable, that are on the lower end of the spectrum from an income standpoint, that have health inequities, that are truly, truly vulnerable consumers that will actually really impact those trends that I showed you earlier in terms of the health of our country, which will impact all of us as well. And so we have been talking with many of our clients about continuing to think about, opportunities for premium, but to also really think about what is formulating for the end of the spectrum that is struggling more look like. And it really has some fascinating implications from ingredients and from just looking at overall price points, we believe. So with that, I think, Amy, we've got some time for questions. Is that right?
We have maybe one question. Can we do one question? Does anybody have one question? We have 1 minute. Any trends that you're seeing in your research from Millennial and Gen Z? Are they doing dietary supplements quicker than Boomers and Gen X?
No, I love it. By the way, rapid fire, I love it. We can do it in a minute. So here's the most interesting thing is actually the aging generation tends to index higher on supplements overall. They tend to kind of buy things like calcium, minerals, especially things for brain health. I would also tell you if you were thinking about formulating and you're thinking about kind of where opportunities are, those boomers are so interesting because they are living longer. They're very focused on living with vitality. So that means very much they're concerned about, they don't want their bodies to outlast their brains. I mean, that is the biggest, like we hear that over and over in the research. And so things around mental acuity and overall vitality, really, really important. And as I mentioned, even menopause has been a huge area of opportunity around formulations.
Well, thank you so much. I know Sherry will be around after this. And one quick announcement, there is a What's Up with Sups networking event tonight at 5. I think you have to wear a costume, but this is Vegas. So just walk around, find something, and thank you for coming.